All right, boys and girls, I guess. Is it okay to call adult women girls, or is that offensive now? Do you guys know? No one cares. All right, great. We have a very special guest today, former Iowa State. I don't believe that Iowa is a real place. We call it the land of make-believe here. But Iowa State Cyclones basketball player Royce White, and now you're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of fighting and a little bit of anti-woke stuff. So how's the fighting going?
Oh, the fighting's going great, man. I've been training now for a little over 2 years, maybe closer to 3. And I just had my debut fight on December 10th, and I lost in a unanimous decision. But, I definitely won the stand-up. I got taken down a few times. Every time I got taken down, I popped right back up. Didn't do a lot of damage when I was on the ground. And I made a lot of mistakes in terms of just not knowing how to prepare for a fight day, right? Because I've never done it. So, for example, I didn't even eat that morning, which is just a complete, non-starter, right? When you're going to go in an octagon and fight, especially for 3 rounds. So, all things that I needed to learn, and I'll make the adjustments and come back again in April and do it again. But I think I showed that I could take a punch. I think I showed that I have a good understanding of the octagon, and I've been actually training versus a lot of guys who are jumping into the fight game who are just doing it for show.
Right. Well, you're also have a history as a pretty incredible athlete as well. So I think that's a bit of a difference than you see from some of these knuckleheads, especially the TikTok people. But so when you were playing ball back in the day, what's your typical day? Like, what time do you wake up and then eat again? Like, get loose, eat again, and then fucking go play the game? Because obviously not eating until, 10 p.m. after you fought, that's not a good idea. Or was it like in the middle of the day or something?
No, it was a late fight. Usually when I played basketball, it depends on what time the game started. Sometimes you'd have a noon game, but a lot of times during the game, during the week, you would have 7 p.m. tip off, something like that. So I usually never really ate breakfast. I would probably do some fruit or something like that in the middle of the day, and make sure that I had my Gatorade probably like 10, 15 minutes before tip off. And that's just how I roll, when I play basketball. So, probably we're addressing that, though, when it comes to the fight day. Because, I never felt tired or gassed, in terms of that I couldn't properly defend myself in there, or that I was going to, that I was in danger because I was tired. It was more that I couldn't step on the gas and finish my opponent like I probably could have.
Right, yeah. That makes sense. I mean, there's probably a lot more anabolic energy in a fight than there is in a basketball game, right?
100%, yeah.
So did you fight before, like when you were in high school or college or anything, or is that something you got into?
Yeah, in the streets.
Yeah, right. What part of Minneapolis are you from?
The Twin Cities is a unique place. I'm pretty much from the Twin Cities, I would say. I was born in St. Paul. I was raised in St. Paul. I played most of my childhood basketball in North Minneapolis, which is probably the most dangerous place in the Twin Cities.
For sure.
Just this past summer, we got close to breaking the record for murders in a year, which is very unfortunate. But I also, my grandmother worked in South Minneapolis. My grandfather was the director of Park and Board in Richfield, which is a little suburb that's, southwest of Minneapolis, but it's still considered Minneapolis to people from the Twin Cities. So, I'm pretty much from all over the Twin Cities.
That's a pretty common story, actually. A lot of people, unless you live in one of the neighborhoods like St. Louis Park or some shit like that, most people moved around to all the satellites around the cities. Got a bunch of buddies from up there. So now you're doing the fighting. Are you going to be in Big 3 again this year?
100%. Yeah. That's the plan. We'll see what happens with the Big 3 season. I'm hopeful that we're going to get back on the road this year instead of being in one designated spot. Obviously, COVID canceled our 2020 season completely, and then we were really confined to Vegas for our latest season, our most recent season this past summer. But I know a lot of the powers that be in the Big 3 want to get back out on the road and travel city to city. So I'm hoping that that's going to be the case.
Well, the only traveling last year was for the playoffs, right? You got to go down to the Bahamas or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, no, we went. We actually in the middle of the season we were scheduled to go to Dallas and then New Orleans. While we were in Dallas, I think New Orleans had a huge COVID spike or something of that nature. So we diverted on the fly. It must have been like a 48-hour notice and decided to come to the Midwest in Chicago, Milwaukee. So we had a Chicago-Milwaukee date of Thursday in Milwaukee and Saturday in Chicago. When I got to Chicago on Tuesday, I tested positive for COVID. So I ended up missing those 2 games. And then the following Saturday on the 10-day quarantine. And I basically missed 3 games in 10 days, which is half a season. So,
yeah, no shit. That's stupid.
It was tough.
That's really
tough.
So were all the games played at the Orleans in the back there? Is that where you actually – I know we went to the opening ceremonies and shit. Is that where the whole thing was?
It was at Orleans Arena, yeah.
Oh, shit. Damn. Well, that kind of sucks. I mean, not that that's a bad place to play. It's a nice setup, but the same spot over and over, it just kind of feels like a pickup game at that point, huh?
Yeah, it was different. But, it turned out good, all things considered, coming back off of COVID. I think all of these leagues, especially a startup one like the Big Three, it's a tough time to execute everything that I thought they did a great job with all things considered. So
right. So now you're getting into fighting and stuff like that, but that's it's not the only thing you're doing. You're doing a lot of I've seen you on Whitlock's show, Jason Whitlock, quite a few times over the past, 2 months or so, I guess, just discussing something that, I mean, it's really interesting to hear from people that have real life experience and have spent some time actually thinking about some of these issues instead of just grabbing onto whatever party line exists and going with that. I think you've got a pretty nuanced take on a lot of the interaction between police and civilians, citizens, whatever you want to call them, and some of the rhetoric that's being used by both sides. Just from your perspective, give me your elevator pitch. Like, frame this issue for me and kind of what your overarching thoughts are. I know one of the things you speak about a lot is that police and policing have kind of been used as a prop or a pawn in this debate. Like, it's been an attempt particularly by leftists, to frame it as a us versus them situation instead of this is an institution we need, let's fix it kind of situation. So if you could just expand on that.
Let me start and frame it by saying that my original introduction into the public eye at 21 years old, so basically my entire adult life, was me advocating for mental health in the sports field, in the basketball field, in the NBA from a policy standpoint. But really it was an advocacy for human beings and the human condition against the corporatocracy. And because of that, I see all of these issues through the prism of mental health or psychological stability. And I'm not talking about fake woke 7 times a day Judeo-Buddhist mental health. I'm talking about the human condition where mind, body, and spirit converge into the perceivable existence mental health, which is part of the reason I was blackballed initially, because I wanted to have a nuanced mental health conversation that wasn't going to be so easily hijacked in the years to come as it has been in the past 6-7 years, you could say, and even more recently here in the last 3 to 4. But so the police issue falls right in line with that, I think. And in that, first of all, I see how problematic and dangerous and tough it is to be a police officer, because I don't have any reason to really lie or be deceitful about what I experienced growing up in neighborhoods that are dangerous and people who do crime, right? And that's not to say that there's anything inherent about certain demographics of people who populate high crime neighborhoods either. We can discuss all of that, actually. But my point has always been that being a police officer is a tough job. There's no doubt about that. And the trauma that they face on a day-to-day basis is not properly addressed. It's actually addressed with about as much negligence as you possibly could, imagine. And in fact, when you look at it from that perspective, it becomes clear that not only have the police been improperly placed in between what I call a free people or citizens and the establishment has actually thrown police under the bus after putting them out as pawns, right? And I think the American people particularly, but also Black people by and large, we don't really see or have a sense of that corporatocracy, right? That grand establishment. And the establishment does an okay job of shielding itself by making people who even talk about a grand establishment as conspiracy theorists, which is completely absurd. I mean, NATO, the United Nations, the Five Eyes,
WEF,
the CIA, the NSA, the IMF, the World Economic. All of these organizations exist, and they are super powerful, and they are very good at executing the agendas that they put down on paper, whether people want to believe it or not. But as it pertains to police specifically, I see that they have been used as pawns for corporatocracy. And, it was strange for me to lead a protest after George Floyd was murdered and hear people say things like, fuck the police, or, the whole system is guilty. And I, as a critical thing, I just thought to myself, like, what do they think they mean when they say the whole system? Right. And just in real time, as I'm out there, there's 10, 15,000, 20,000 people out in the streets in Minneapolis, and I'm leading these protests. So what I did was, I tried to speak to the idea of corporatocracy. And in the protest, I tried to physically lead people to the landmarks that made them think about this issue a different way. So, for example, we would start our protest downtown Minneapolis in front of the Vikings Stadium, US Bank Stadium. And we would go, down First Avenue, which is pretty much the economic center of Minneapolis. And we would stop at the Federal Reserve, and we would do a die-in at the Federal Reserve. And I'm sure plenty of these, fake woke leftists were like, why are we first of all, what is this building? And that's the first way you can tell that the left and that many of these people at the grassroots level have been misled by a media industrial complexes. They don't even know that a lot of people don't know that if there's a Federal Reserve in your city, that's the most exclusive building in your city.
Oh, yeah.
There's only 12 of them in the entire country, and Minneapolis has one. But there were people out there like, what are we doing here? And I'm like, guys, we're talking about defunding the police. We're $30 trillion in debt. Where did the $30 trillion go? Because it certainly didn't go to police departments for them to allow police officers who encounter trauma to have extended paid leave, or to hire more police officers so that we could have a better rotation, so that a police officer who encountered a 3-year-old being killed by their parent because they wouldn't stop, fussing or whatever the case may be, and they have to encounter that on patrol one day and then be back out on patrol 2 days later. Right? These are just fundamental things that have been neglected that would make a huge difference way before we even get to talking about race.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those are institutional things, right? That people just have no understanding of. There's a metaphor that I like to use. If you put fire ants and black ants in a jar together, they will go about their business. Pretty much, they'll build their little environments and blah blah blah, and pretty much ignore each other. But if you shake the jar up, they'll start attacking and killing each other, right? Because they think the other guy did it. But they never stop to question who shook the jar in the first place. And that's pretty much where we are in America right now, is nobody is taking that time.
And I say the part about them being pawned because the narrative from the establishment or from the media industrial complex certainly is one that suggests or that promotes that people shouldn't look at that people either shouldn't care about the systemic piece, or when they do, they make it super superficial as possible, right? It's like the whole system is guilty, and then 2-3 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later, the medical industrial complex isn't a part of the same system.
Oh yeah. Right.
And so and then the establishment has this great way of trying to, and I encountered this well before this most recent attack on right-wing conservatives with being canceled or deplatformed, right? I was deplatformed and canceled by the establishment before Twitter and Instagram were even really popular, right? For just saying the truth. So when this latest wave came, I had that personal experience, and I understood that people who would more readily be considered on my side of the political aisle, because I had led these protests, that I had to have a genuine and authentic message for them as well. And in bringing that, I was just by default pushed to the right.
Yeah, right. That's funny, isn't it? Like people, I guess like Dave Rubin used to be, I mean, he was with the Young Turks when he started out his journalism career. Yep. Even Russell Brand, people are like, oh, he's an alt-right guy now. Like, no, he's just fucking saying shit that's the truth. And because you believe in this binary paradigm, it has to be this or that. There can't be a fucking nuanced conversation about anything. It's nonsense, right? You talk about negligence with the police. They have some of the highest rates of substance abuse of any profession in America. And there's a reason for that. Is because the job fucking sucks and it's hard and it's long hours and blah, blah, blah. I'm a veteran. We treat our veterans the same way. We grind them to fucking powder. And then once it's time to fucking rehydrate them again, we're like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, buddy. And it's funny that it happens because these are primarily conservative and libertarian people. And one of the points I try to make is this is what's happened to poor people in America, regardless of race, forever, right? The same thing. They grind you into paste, and then when it's time for you to get yours, they're like, oh, sorry, the fucking well's run dry. And it happens every single time. But it's not white people versus black people or anything like that. It is a very small percentage of very wealthy people versus everybody else. And it's been like that since the beginning of humanity, right? It's never been one race versus another since we were cavemen. It's been people who hold land and resources versus everybody else. And it always will be like that because the only color that really matters in this or any country is green. That's it. Like all these divisions, it's all a canard. It's nonsense.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I agree with that partially. I think, I think that race has been used as a three-card Monte for sure, especially in the way that it's promoted and propagandized by the media. But, as of lately, I've just been giving a lot of thought to the idea of not discarding race as a very real biological mechanism, because, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, of course
I think that we become accustomed to talk about these issues in such a way where we are afraid ourselves to walk over certain landmines that then disincentivize us from being able to even talk about it properly. It's like, because I hear this a lot because now I'm in the conservative circles. And by the way, I mean, I was baptized Catholic, so I'm a Christian. And I would say, I guess by many standards, I do have a lot of conservative beliefs, many conservative beliefs. But I'm in a lot of more political conservative circles now. And I see often people say, well, we don't need to talk about race. Race isn't important. It's like, yeah, okay, go talk to a state penitentiary warden, and you ask him about race and the default race gangs. I mean, it makes sense that people group themselves into race as a defense mechanism when the time calls for it, and that a lot of that happens out in everyday society as well. And there's something biological to be said for that. And as soon as you can see that territory in the conversation, it opens the door to say that we should just overlook and dismiss biology as a whole. And that's where you end up with, there's no such thing as a man or a woman.
Yeah, right.
and so I don't play those games, right?
Stupid.
So it's like, no, race is an issue. It's been weaponized for sure, and it's been propagandized. But there's definitely things to be said for certain groups of individuals, whether you talk about the historical evolution of those groups, where those people live, the values that are traditional in those groups of people, or whatever the case may be. We should be able to talk about all of those things with no fear. And people are just too easily offended, I think.
Yeah, it's stupid.
I did this the other day on Whitlock's podcast when we talked about anti-Semitism and a Jewish elite. And I'm like, look, if I can say with good faith that there's a black elite, I should be able to say that there's a Jewish elite. That's not anti-Semitic. And even furthermore, it's like, if I say there's a Jewish elite, that doesn't mean that there's a nefarious conspiracy for all Jewish people. It means that there is an elite group of people, like you are alluding to, that have certain traditions and values and certain beliefs that maybe they don't conspire directly on a day-to-day basis, hop on a conference and say, we're going to do this. But the spirit of their motivation pushes them to decide or choose or select for certain actions, in certain situations.
Yeah, it's not a fucking email. It's a wink and a nod, right?
It's a wink and a nod,
which is far more sinister because there's no real evidence for it unless you've experienced it directly, and that's why it's so hard for what you're talking about. A lot of these young kids, everything is fucked up and they can feel it, right? People can feel when something's off and they know something's fucked up and they want to get out there and get involved and change it and make things adjust again, but they don't know how because they haven't experienced what you're talking about. They just haven't. I mean, and I don't know how to communicate it to people other than long form discussion like, hey, this, and this is what you're feeling, and you think it's because of this, but in reality, it's a very small fraction. Like, of course, there's a small fraction of any race or religious group or corporate group or anything, right, that controls most of that shit with a wink and a nod because they hold the power. It's just how it works. That's that. There's
nothing. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with there being an elite. I'm not anti-elite. I'm a competitor. If you're a better basketball player, you should get more minutes. You should be the one who we put the ball in the hands of more often because you've earned it usually through hard work and skill development, determination, discipline, and those types of core principles that are very valuable, especially when it comes to trying to set a goal and then achieve a goal. You need the people who have the core principles to move you, to get you closer to achieving whatever goal is set. The problem is that corruption has become the status quo in our elite groups, right? Like the ascension to an elite status often in our society comes with the wink and nod or the quid pro quo or the unspoken agreement that you can never challenge the corrupt nature or spirit of the status quo. And so that's where the issue lies. And I think that's where a lot of these young people do have that spiritual intuition to push back and say something's wrong. Like, I'm very critical of the left, as you know. I'm anti-wokeism for sure. But I have the integrity to say that I'm not wholesale against Black Lives Matter. I'm against the political organization.
Right. Yeah.
But the energy, I think they have the right energy. They have the wrong motive, and they have bad ideas. Bad
leadership too. I think that's the problem. Like if you're in a situation where you have an elevated level of participation and energy towards some kind of common good, if it's social justice or whatever, and it manifests itself in destructive ways, that is either an absence of leadership or shitty leadership. It's one of the two things. And you can see it all over the place.
Predatory leadership.
Yeah, like the fucking this goober, the New York chapter president of BLM is like, oh, there's gonna be blood in the streets. Like, dude, you're not gonna do shit. Shut the fuck up. You're a pussy. If you were gonna do anything, you would have done it by now. You're a coward, right? I mean, you guys, they've been protesting in New York since 2011, I think, with Occupy Wall Street. They haven't done shit. You were still in college when this stuff started. I mean, come on, man. I think a lot of these problems, people are having a hard time quantifying the problem, right? They want to go from feeling the issue to solving the issue, but they haven't taken that very critical step of quantifying exactly what the problem. Now, if it was your car, you would take it to a mechanic and they would diagnose it, right? They would be like, hey, I think this, and this is wrong. Here's the evidence for that. We need to replace these parts. And you, as a rational human being, would be like, that makes sense. Go ahead and do it. But nobody has gone through those steps, right?
Yeah.
Well, several people have gone through the steps, but the groups that are raising all the money and doing all the actions haven't, clearly, because you take them to the Fed, where we've printed like $30 trillion in the last 20 years. And we wonder why inflation's going crazy and shit. Like, people are like, I don't understand, man. Like, oh, you don't understand? Well, fucking go back to economic school, bitch. Like this
Yeah,
is
well, that was, but that's a sleight of hand too, because and where I am very understanding of where we are. Like I say, Black Lives Matter has the right energy. They have bad motivation and bad ideas. I'm also not unaware of the fact that people's own inclination towards corruption for themselves allows them to kind of pretend like they don't understand the bigger corruption going on around them, right? Corruption has a way of sucking in the weak, right? Or the immoral, right? So, a lot of these people, for example, is like, it's not that people don't understand that $30 trillion has been siphoned off by our political system and given to our elites to fund the rise of China and to build this, globalist, neoliberal, anti-human society, right? It has been siphoned off and given to Silicon Valley to build up this dopamine project, right? Which I've been saying lately, like that. You want to see where the biggest drug dealers are? They're not in Sinaloa. Okay, they're in Silicon Valley, right? Yeah. A drug operation that rivals any in history going on in Silicon Valley.
I mean, the largest lawsuits in the history of this country, the top 10, are all fucking pharmaceutical companies. That's not propaganda. That is the fucking fact. You can look it up right now.
100%. And so my point is that there are a lot of people who may not understand the logistics, but again, in spirit, they're not looking either. So I don't give much concession on that front, because I understand that I understand the look away to ride the wave, right? And people want to be on social media. They want to be getting high. They want to be getting drunk. They want a low moral standard. And so the overall low moral standard has put us in a position as a populace where we can't hold our systems that preside over us, that are supposed to work for us, to a higher moral standard. And then we look around like, what's happened here? It's like, well, you guys are atheists. That's what happened. I mean, let's just call it what it is. You guys thought that you could have a moral structure without any metaphysical faith, and it came to fruition that it's not so easy. It's possible for some people, but en masse, it's certainly looking like it's not. Well,
I don't think anybody really tried, right? They just thought they didn't enjoy, and I'm not a religious person either. They didn't like religion, so they just abandoned it. But pretty much every anti-religion person, if you want to call them that, over time is like, what the smart play is to keep the spiritual / moral structure and just do away with the rest of that stuff, if that's what you believe. But we just threw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And that's where this postmodernist Marxist nonsense comes from, where there's no objective reality. That chick's got a nice dick is a sentence you can say, and people are like, yeah, I guess. Like, what the fuck? No, dude, that's not a real thing. The fuck are you talking about?
Out of control.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird, and moral decay is really what it is, right? Like the Stoics understood this. They went through the pantheon period where there's all kinds of different gods. They experienced monotheism and then back to plurality of gods a number of times, and it's always been the same. Like a man needs a code, right? That's something that used to be a trope in old Western movies where a guy was a criminal, but he still had a code. You know what I mean? So even the worst among us have to have some kind of moral code. And I think they just abandoned it without any plans. Like they had no plan to reinstitute it in any kind of way.
Yeah, well, the abandonment of it was the plan.
I guess, yeah, it's probably true, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, the Bible is so prophetic in that the model of Jesus. I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday. The model of Jesus Christ, the biggest takeaway from his life and the story of his life was that he was never in need of external validation. And then the second greatest value was that of self-sacrifice. Right. So the doing away with that story or that institution isn't by accident. They wanted the moral decay. Right. I'm not a believer that this moral decadence is just happenstance. This is exactly what a very deliberate group of people saw the opportunity for, and people's own vices and own lack of impulse control gave way to, and it created the downward spiral. That's, the perfect storm, you could say. But by no means is it on accident. And in the metaphysical sense, it certainly isn't on accident. That's why I think, people who have a metaphysical faith understand that evilness or wickedness has a conspiring energy to it. It's right. The conspiracy doesn't need to be spoken. There's a connection. There's a lean or a tilt towards evilness.
Yeah, I mean, it's idle hands at the devil's workshop, right? That's been
right.
the case.
Right.
Pretty much every major religion has a couple of the same stories, right, or the same aphorisms. That's one of them. The golden rule is one of them. You'll see that in pretty much every religion, especially Western religions.
Right.
And, excuse me, it's something that life is kind of fucked up. It's hard, and people need purpose in their life. Like especially men, I would say the purpose of masculinity in society, evolutionarily speaking, is to provide and protect, right? Those are the two main tenets of masculinity. It's to protect from existential threats and then provide whatever it is that needs to be provided. And I'm not saying that traditional gender roles are something you shouldn't, like your wife is supposed to be cooking and cleaning, otherwise she's not moral. No, that's not it, right? But if you're a man, just evolutionarily speaking, biologically, if you're a man and you're not providing and protecting, you're not going to feel right. It's going to feel wrong to you, right? And you're going to be miserable and unhappy. I didn't make the rules, bitch. That's just how it works. You know what I mean? Like, people fucking can't. Sometimes they can't, but because they get focused on the way things ought to be. Like, it should be like this. That's not fair. Who the fuck said life was going to be fair? Like, would you read that in a book somewhere? Like, that's not reality.
Yeah, that's the first sign that people have a bad coherence of logic, bad principles, and are, the start. That's where the start of the breakdown of the cognitive map begins. Is if you start from the outset that life is going to be fair, or that there's any way for human beings to make it fair, you don't understand despair. You don't understand angst. These are philosophical first principles that despair and anxiety are emergent. It's about how we deal with those things as individuals that then shape how we interact with the world outside of us. And so, fairness is a stretch in any society. I mean, it's just, it's not fair that we're born and then die. I mean, you could make that claim.
Sure. Yeah.
But you could also make the claim that that's beautiful. But I think, to be honest, the reason why the right has been able to better anchor itself to what we would consider a reasonable reality or coherent logic is because they have a metaphysical faith in the foundations that they're at least somewhat trying to honor. Now, is every right-wing Christian a good Christian? Of course not.
Or even ridiculous. A good person, right? Yeah, for sure. But they have, like you said, they have an anchor. There's always something to go back to.
Anchor.
Yeah,
they have an anchor, and people fail to understand how important anchors are for the cognitive map, for cognitive stability. So on the left, you have political ideology that basically tries to resolve all of its existential angst through man-made solution. Yeah. And when the man-made solution doesn't work, or it breaks down, or it starts to waver, and then the anxiety goes into overdrive, and they try and overcorrect. And that's what you're seeing with the vaccine mandate. Yeah. It was, okay, well, first of all, we didn't want to acknowledge that it was man-made, right? Because that would have given us too much anxiety from the outset. Because then it was, well, we brought this on ourselves, that this indoctrination and this altar of science and in the church of globalism put us in this position. So from the outset, we were off kilter. But then the response was, okay, well, let's give a man-made solution. Let's lock people down. It'll be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We'll be back to normal. Then it was, okay, the lockdowns are going to last until we get a reasonable vaccine. Well, the vaccines are going to keep you out of the hospital or keep you from dying. Now, that's not true. Or first it was the vaccine is going to keep it from spreading. That wasn't true. And now in the wake of it, after we tried to resolve an existential angst with a man-made solution that doesn't work, now it's, okay, we can't face ourselves. We can't look in the mirror and say, we've made a mistake.
Yeah.
Now the answer is to say anybody who speaks the truth is now a target for tyrannical, authoritarian persecution.
Yeah, for sure. It's so a lot of people take it a step farther and say that this was all planned. I think it's Hanlon's razor, right? If incompetence will explain it, you probably don't need to go to conspiracy necessarily. And it's the wink and a nod culture. It's weakness, weak leadership, and fear that lead to shit like this, right? Where instead of just admitting that look, if Fauci just said, hey, this is what we think is happening now, there's a good chance since we're so early on that it's going to change. But they didn't want to say that because if they said that, then it also applies to the vaccine, right? Because if they put it out that this is moving quickly, things are going to change, there's waning fucking trust in the vaccine, which there should be because it's new. That's how fucking science works. You should never trust anything immediately.
Same way with polio, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Polio was.
Excuse me. Now we're getting into this period where I think through the same. I want to pivot a little bit here. I think through the same, because since we're on the topic, in the same vein as some of this authoritarian overreach is happening, the corporatism that you referred to earlier, which in my opinion is far more sinister than communism. Communism is obvious, right? It's obvious. Right. You can see the policies. Right. You can see the fucking tanks rolling through Tiananmen Square. And people, being people, have a natural urge to resist that nonsense. You've seen it in the host states, Russia and China, but especially in their satellite states over the last 60 years or so. People like wars and fucking revolutions, all kinds of shit. But the corporatism thing happens bit by bit. It's like, well, it's just this. It's just 2 weeks. It's just a shot. It's just another shot. It's just shutting my kid's school down or whatever. And then all of a sudden, everything's fucked. And I think that's far more sinister because it happens slow.
Well, I would agree. I think that right now, as it stands, the NWO, which is 100% a real thing. Okay? In Australia, they're using the term New World Order right out in the open.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody who doesn't believe that the New World Order agenda is real, they are trying to deal with their own existential anxiety in a dishonest way.
Yep.
And there are a lot of people who are doing that. I won't play those games. The NWO agenda is 100% real. And right now, I see it as a five-headed hydra. You got big tech, on top or up in the cloud. That's the eye in the sky. And then you got the three industrial complexes, military, medicine, and media. And underneath it all, underpinning it all, you got the central banks. And they see countries who already have a head start on authoritarianism, like China and the CCP, as the perfect engine to smooth over the transition to an authoritarian society. So it's almost like they're in direct league with each other, right? Right. And that's why this whole, democratic boycott, for example, a diplomatic boycott, for example, the Beijing Olympics is the ultimate wink and a nod.
Yeah.
It's like for our Western civilization who believe in freedom and have been sold on democracy and the American dream of a government that works for you and not you slaving for a government. We have to preserve the idea that we don't agree with what you're doing to the Uyghurs, but we're not really going to make any dramatic changes to how we deal with you in our economic relationship, which is the ultimate binding factor between the United States and China or the West.
China only cares about money. That's it. They only care about their central strength in their country, and they get that through fucking global commerce. That's what they care about. They don't care about anybody's feelings or any kind of political agenda or anything like that. They just care about power.
Power. They're the East. They're the new East India Trading Company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting the way it manifests itself. Like you're talking about NWO, and people are like, "What are there like 8 people meeting in a secret room somewhere?" No, it's fucking the same thing that's happened since the beginning of humanity. Patricians, the aristocracy, will protect the aristocracy from everybody else, regardless. Even if they agree with the person politically, they'll protect the aristocracy first, always, because without that, they don't exist. Right? That's
And so, yeah, and I was on the front line of that. Like in 2013, when I came out and talked about mental health, I said, guys, this isn't about NBA players having mental health policies on paper to protect us from psychological turmoil. Right? That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that professional sports in this country and around the world are a watering hole for a global corporate community. And mental health is the way to say the human condition. So how the corporatocracy prioritizes the human condition tells us a lot about who they are and what they feel is important. Not that we couldn't already see that from the results in our society, but if we need something specific and detailed to pin down, like you said, like, let's get specific, let's quantify, well, let's use mental health. You have a topic that everybody sort of agrees is really important in the most superficial way, but nobody wanted to write anything down concrete about, and I don't mean anything complex, I mean the most general, generic. It's like, okay, mental health is a part of a comprehensive health. They didn't even want to get that on paper.
yeah, it's
And that wasn't by accident, though. It was
no, of course
because,
not. Yeah,
well, most people were like, well, the NBA isn't a mental health institution. It's like, lay off the beers.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
Right, right.
they're technically correct about that, but everything. I mean, it's like when you're on a gun range. There's a saying: everybody is a range safety. Meaning, if you see something unsafe, say something about it. See something, say something. That's like the I am my brother's keeper, as a matter of fact. It's one of the first lessons that is in the Bible, as a matter of fact. I think it's in the first 10 chapters of Genesis, where it's like, I'm not my brother's keeper, and everybody's like, yeah, you kind of are, bro. That's kind of how we set this whole thing up, especially here in America.
Absolutely
right.
Right.
I mean, that's especially here in America. Not that you necessarily even have to take a religious approach from it, but this system of government, of federalism, only works if you and I agree as citizens of this country that if somebody else comes around fucking with us or there's a bad actor amongst us, we agree to collectively take that fucking threat out. Right. That's the only way it ever works. Now you talk about.
But what I was going to say.
Oh no, go ahead.
What I was going to say was that the idea that the NBA wasn't a mental health institution and shouldn't be charged with that issue. It's not about the NBA being a mental health institution or not. What the problem is they are linked to an agenda where the top percent of people, the decision makers, did already have designs and plans to be predatory around the human psychology. And that's what we saw come from Silicon Valley. Now, the rest of us didn't understand the plans of these big social media conglomerates when they were first rolling out. But the Wall Street bankers who funded them had those plans on paper already.
Oh, yeah.
They saw the growth model. They saw the expansion model. They saw what Mark Zuckerberg and his technocrat, co-conspirators wanted to do to not only the American people, but a new global economy, a new global digital economy, right? So they were aware, which is why, in retrospect, it makes complete sense that they didn't want to have a full-throated mental health conversation because they all planned to be predatory on the human psychology, and look where we are.
Yeah, you can see
social media has become the cocaine of our generation, if not worse.
You can see the how desperately they'll protect it too, even amongst their own. Like when Elon Musk is like, "Hey, you guys are a bunch of idiots," they're like, "Fuck you, you're doing this, or you're doing." People try to demonize Elon Musk, and all he's trying to do is get to Mars. Man, leave that guy alone. But yeah, all the things you're talking about is part of a much bigger system. And we talked about before how a lot of people haven't experienced it, like the middle and lower middle classes or poor classes haven't experienced the corporatism part. And People that are just kind of skating through life in the middle class don't understand how this same ideology has been leveraged against primarily poor black people in inner cities over the last 40 or 50 years. Some to some degree, poor white people through the Rust Belt and the Appalachian areas as well, but mostly, excuse me, the black community. So ownership in America is over. We discuss on this show a lot the rapid decline of home ownership in the United States. Companies like BlackRock just building rental properties everywhere. The primary way that that the middle class in America builds wealth throughout their lifetime is through the mortgage in their home, right? So the equity in the mortgage in their home is the primary way people build equity or build wealth, and that's wealth that they send to or give to their children, and then their children grow that wealth, and that becomes generational wealth, which is the only way to gain upward mobility unless you just get lucky, right? That's pretty much the only way. Excuse me. Now, it isn't just with home ownership.
Unless you're born 6'8", 260 pounds.
Yeah, that helps. That helps, yeah.
Right. That type of thing works too. So.
Yeah, for sure. that does help. But the upward mobility portion of that is one thing, right? The home ownership and the wealth and stuff like that. But there's something far more terrible at play here. Justin Rebzani has recently rightly pointed out that when somebody says my Instagram or my Facebook or my Twitter, factually speaking, that is incorrect because you don't own any of that, right? You don't own any of that property. Therefore, it doesn't matter what the truth is. What matters is who controls the property. You know what I mean? So now not only are people being, especially millennials only own, I think, like 38% home ownership now amongst millennials. That's fucked up because we're moving into the generation where we're the people with expendable income, allegedly, right? But it's just not like that anymore. So not only are we renting a place to live, we're also renting a place where we think and share those thoughts with others. You know what I mean? That is a dystopian nightmare. And it's one that the black community is all too familiar with because home ownership and these developers in the city will like to say, oh, we're reinvigorating the area. What they really mean is they're going to build a couple of corporate stores and then price all the black people that live there out of the market so they have to move somewhere else. That's what really happens. And it's been going on for decades with the federal government. They've been pretty much baiting, leading black people around by the nose and saying things like Biden talking about if you don't vote for me, you're not black, right? It's become a deep-seated part of the culture. But what the fuck have the Democrats done for black people in the last 40 years?
Now that's racist.
Yeah, that's like the most racist thing I've ever heard a president say, ever.
So when I said that, we can't just dismiss race, those are the types of situations that come to mind.
Well, that real racism always comes from like leftist authoritarians these days. Like it's the only place you ever hear it anymore.
I couldn't believe, I could not wrap my mind around the idea that Joe Biden could get away with saying that. Right after
that he said that, he went and won South Carolina handily. What, a week or two after that or some shit? It was insane.
I've known, I'm a huge reader of Malcolm X. So I grew up with the idea or the belief that white liberals were dangerous to the black community. For myself in my life, that was one of the turning points where I saw that this indoctrination during a time that was expressively promoted and propagandized as a pro-black shift in American politics where the vote was going to be largely anchored around where you fell on some of these policing civilian issues like George Floyd and that situation. I saw firsthand that this indoctrination is out of control. If this man, who already had a very sketchy racist history in his time as an elected official, can just come out and say, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. It was one of the most disgusting things I think I've ever heard. And to see fellow black people go along with it was even more concerning. So, the fight is on, right? The fight is on, and it's going to be ugly. If people are that morally depraved and lack self-worth and are that dependent on party politics and party identity and taglines and woke ideology, we got a real fight ahead of us, right? Because it's no longer about, can I just convince you that your idea is bad?
Yeah.
That day is done. Right? It's either I'm saying what I'm saying to profess the truth because I believe that saying the truth has a universal power in and of itself, or it's I have to prepare myself for war.
Yeah.
Because that's how out of control this has gotten. And there's something to be said for when you let bad ideas or evil spiritness to manifest, you create a flashpoint for yourself down the road, which is also what I try to say about mental health. You have to deal with these issues upstream. Once you get downstream, once you get downriver, you're in trouble. You got to go to the headwater. And so we haven't done that. These things have gotten out of control. And now I see a lot of us, people who are critical thinkers who want to have a coherence of logic and have a logical conversation, get frustrated because we don't understand how these people continue to believe these absurd things. But the real problem is that we don't see that we stood by too long.
Right.
All of these people were not, like, I'm like an OG whistleblower, which is crazy because I'm 30 years old.
Yeah, no shit.
Right? It's like 10 years ago, you guys weren't saying corporatocracy. A few of you were. A few of you people were saying corporatocracy, but you weren't taking those real hits. You weren't, you weren't calling out Hollywood and their allegiance to DC or DC and the party of Davos or the donor class or how the lobbying works in this country. They were softly doing it. Oh, well, we should look into, these lobbying rules, but they weren't just full stop. Like, this is corrupt.
No, it was that, what's that dick's name? The Mormon dude from, God damn it. Corporations are people, my friend.
Mitt Romney?
Mitt Romney, yeah. Mitt Romney with the Citizens United bullshit. That was the straw that broke the camel's back here in America as far as corporatism and politics goes. And I think it was really easy at the time for people that leaned conservative to talk about it, but Obama was in office, so the left didn't want to, because if you start talking about it, then you have to start looking at opensecrets.org and seeing exactly who was funding the Obama campaign. And then it becomes real problematic, right? It becomes real problematic. And if you're looking at the list of guilty people, when you look at a thing and you say, this is wrong, and you look at the list of guilty people and you see some friends on there and you're like, well, I'm not going to say anything, then you're a fucking cunt and you're a coward, in my opinion. And think about that, though. The powers that be figure out how to gerrymander the vote based on a few issues. So they think this group of people cares about this, and this group of people cares about this, and this group of people cares about this. How can I make them all care in the same way about that thing so they all vote for me? It's just classic fucking information operation manipulation. It's like a Russian tactic that they've been using at the KGB since the 40s. This is nothing new. It's completely evil. I just don't know, man, I don't know how you get people to care about reality at this point, because there's so much social currency tied to being on the right side of history, which you the way you addressed that in Whitlock was very smart. Like if you worry, or maybe it was Jason that said it, but if you worry about being on the right side of history, then that means whatever the social whims of the time are, you have to agree with that regardless of what your fucking foundation is. And that's not how any of that's supposed to work. Like, right is right and wrong is wrong. I don't give a shit what all this other stuff is.
Yes and no. I mean, when Jason said that, we were at the end of the episode. I didn't really push back, but what I meant, or what I see history as, is the factual history.
Yeah.
I don't see the history as to the victor go the spoils and they get to write the passages of time, right? It's like, no, there is a universal history. There is a history and an account of God. And in that history, if you're on the right side, with God, then you have succeeded in life.
Right.
And so, I definitely agree that the rights, the man's history, man's written history is corruptible and often a product of who wins the game of corruption. We shouldn't and can't get tangled up in that. But I think these issues are much more cut and dry than we want to admit. It's just like bear witness, rebuke and refute, tell the truth. We spent a lot of time in this country and around the world, in the West and in modern civilization, pretending like the material world would suffice, that it would be good enough. And it's been proven wrong, that over time, this radical materialism, this infatuation with external validation is the highway to hell. And now we're living in it. So it's much more simple than people want to admit. People are radically indulged and engorged in sin. And it just seems very clear to me in that sense. And so, we are fighting a very spiritual battle. And in that, there aren't going to be any easy wins, right? The problem is very simple, but that doesn't mean that the solution is going to be. It's going to be hard. And now we're going to have to make up for some time where we didn't stay disciplined enough.
Yeah,
and it's for everybody. It's not just Christian. I mean, the Catholic Church is just as. I mean, you have a pope who's affirmed vaccine mandates or affirmed the vaccine, which is a tacit way for the global corporatocracy to tell people who want religious exemptions. Well, the Pope said that it's okay, and he's the head of the Christian faith, which is absolutely. Well, first of all, it's theologically wrong, but it's definitely a sleight of hand to use against people who wanted religious exemptions for an experimental vaccine. So these are the things that we're going to have to address as a society, and I look forward to it. I mean, I get up out of bed every day in the morning, optimistic and looking forward to conversations like this, to be able to bear witness, but to run into a random person I don't know who wants to lie and gerrymander the truth and just slap them right across the mouth with a good dose of logic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice thing to do, and there's one particular issue, and that is policing, that I feel it's been twisted around so much because everybody wants to throw their 2 cents in, that I don't think I haven't seen a whole lot of honest conversations happen from either side of the political spectrum in a very long time. So you've made an interesting point a bunch of times about the government monopoly on violence and stuff like that. Something that Thomas Hobbes talks about in Leviathan. Weber talks about it in one of his works as well. I think it's interesting that conservatives go on about this issue that police have a right to defend themselves, that it's an intrinsically dangerous job, and blah, 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 you should comply, and blah, blah, blah. Fair point, right? It's a dangerous situation, and sometimes we see those dangerous situations where there isn't necessarily a bad actor, but the result is bad because of the intrinsic danger of the situation. That happens sometimes.
Right.
But I do wonder, and you've mentioned this before, as people who seem to be pretty inclined towards liberty before anything else, it seems weird to me that a lot of conservatives over the past several years, especially with the thin blue line stuff, have not been that concerned with cops who just unjustly pull their service weapon on people. Like, I'm a fucking soldier. I've been in a bunch of gunfights. If some dude comes up and pulls a gun on me, we're going to have a fucking problem. I don't care what he's wearing, especially if I'm not doing anything wrong. That's going to be a problem for me. And I expect that a lot of people are the same, whether they've been involved, like people who are alphas who respond to fight, flight, or freeze with the fight part. That's just how it's going to happen sometimes. Why does the government get the presumption of innocence, but the citizen doesn't? Because I'm pretty sure that the decal on the side of the car says protect and serve, and it doesn't mean protect and serve the fucking government. It means protect and serve all of us.
Brother, I am 100% with you. You know that. And I wish that the conservative side of this argument could find a better locale, a better place of logic around this issue, because I think it would help really clarify a very old rift that exists in America between her and her black people.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've tried to provide that insight and bridge that gap, because I think a huge turning point in this fight against globalism will be for the black man to come over to the conservative side of the aisle and bring together an alliance that is America first, that is freedom first, that is, patriotic, you could say, that is morally disciplined, that is Christian, right? More interested in the preservation of goodness here in this country and in our stewardship around the world. So I think that will be a turning point. But for some reason, it's very hard to convince many conservatives that the state has a monopoly on violence. And that's what you're talking about and it's the strangest thing, because the pro-gun lobby, right? This whole Second Amendment movement is predicated on the idea of the ever-present threat of a tyrannical government, and that you always have to keep the tyrannical government's ambitions in check through the threat of Americans and citizens being able to own firearms, which I completely agree with. But for some reason, we've traded in our tax money basically for the false blanket of security that police are just doing their jobs. And in doing so, any casualty or any incompetence or negligence that they may, or malice too, that they may engage in is just part of the deal. And it's like, okay, until it comes time to do vaccine mandates and you have those same police officers who you talk about a thin blue line with arresting handicapped women with cerebral palsy on the street in New York City for eating without a vaccine card.
Yeah, right.
But black people could see that coming 60 years ago, right? I mean, but that's where we can't avoid race, right? And that's where I'm proud to say, look, I'm a black man now. My great grandmother came from Norway, right? She was a first generation immigrant. I have a grandmother who was a first generation immigrant from Mexico. So I have rich immigrant blood. But if I got booked into the county jail, I'm a black man.
Yeah, right. Okay? Yeah, for sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And with that, I need to be able to bring a real insight from my community and my experience. We know that every cop who pulls his gun isn't afraid for his life. We know that every cop who pulls his gun isn't just doing his job. That's ridiculous. And people who have this false sense of belief in the rule of law, and that's really what we're talking about, fail to acknowledge with a full throat how as soon as lawmakers become corrupt, the people who enforce those laws are corrupt.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of how it works, right?
On the right, we're all in agreement that the lawmakers are corrupt. Right. On the right, right? That's a foregone conclusion. But for some reason, they think that the job of policing is detached from that. And I agree that there's been a predatory agenda to use the police, in a sneaky way. But that doesn't change the fact that overall, as a citizen, we're talking about citizenship versus authoritarianism.
Yeah, for sure.
And as a citizen, I should have the right at all times, especially if I'm innocent, to defend myself against somebody who's putting my life in danger. Period. If they're carrying a badge that wields the power of the state, so what? That's the same as them coming into your house without a warrant. If a cop pulls a gun on you on the street and you haven't done anything wrong, you should be able to defend yourself. You should actually be able to kill that police officer in self-defense. You can't pull your service weapon on me and point it at me if I haven't done anything wrong. And if you mistake me for some greater set of circumstances, that's not on me. It's you guys' job to do good police work. I don't work for you.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, to be honest. Like, we'll go through some of the data here. There's been a concerted effort in the last few years by conservatives to support the police, and I understand it because it is an institution that is designed to protect people. I get that. And it's one that has worked pretty well in most places for a long time. There's some places where it didn't work well, and then it started to work well again. And then, there's still issues with the criminal justice process itself that are super fucked up, and you can't blame a street cop for that. There's about 275 million interactions between police and civilians every year, and very few of them end in some kind of negative way. Like, it's a very small amount, but it's a big enough amount that I look at police officers and I'm like, hey, what the fuck, man? Like, it's your job to stop this shit. It's not our job to stop it. Like, there's no police reform that's going to make human beings better human beings. That's just not a thing. Now, money can do it, I guess. You can't do it defunding people, but
right there. Well, right there. Look, you remember a few moments back you talked about corporatism and how it's this slow encroachment on free versus communism. Well, and this is why I said in the podcast with Whitlock that the police departments have become a pawn of the corporatocracy, and the left knows it. Well, we all know it, really. And that's why the defund the police is such a dishonest trope. Yeah. We need to refund and overhaul the police departments. Yep. In that way, once the funding isn't the easy scapegoat, we'll be able to see how much of it is real racism.
Yeah,
but
sure,
you can't as long as the funding makes the incompetence and the negligence so high probability. But what you just said is the same thing. The police departments in that way are a reflection of corporatism, of our corporatist culture, right? We think that the little time, the 1 in 100th or 1,000th or 100,000 time where the police officer unjustly kills a citizen is just part of the deal. It's like, well, you have a low understanding of your citizenship.
That's a low that's the low expectation bullshit. Fuck that.
That's
like
self-loathing, low expectation, low self-value, elitist project that's going on in this country where the common man, the working man, doesn't feel that their citizenship really has any value, especially in the shadow of the state. Yeah, and I'm 100% against that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's like this presumption, the qualified immunity thing, the presumption of innocence on behalf of the state or the representative of the state, where as a citizen who's otherwise minding my business, a cop pulls a weapon on me without cause, and I don't consider fitting the description to be just cause to pull a weapon on me. Fuck that shit.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what the fuck does that mean? Because we've looked into some of those cases and it was like, this dude's 5'8", the description said 6'3". What the fuck are you talking about? Like you can't fucking tell the difference. I mean, if it's 5'10" and 6 foot, maybe, because everybody lies about that on Tinder anyways. But if you can't tell the difference between 5'8" and 6'3", you got a problem. But why is the presumption that I don't have the right to defend myself? You know what I mean? If that's the social contract, then I'm out. I'm not signing that. Fuck that shit. And I think people are starting to see it now with what you're talking about, enforcing these ridiculous mandates. White folks are getting dragged out of restaurants now, right? For trying to feed their family.
Not only that, this is the funniest thing that I saw happen. When I was talking about mental health and said, listen, the corporatocracy is coming. That they are on their way. I was sounding the alarm, ringing the bell. Listen, these corporate oligarchs, who the NBA and pro sports are a perfect example of or representative of, these people are coming. I'm talking to them behind closed doors, and they're saying things like, yeah, well, mental health is an important issue, but why do we have to listen to you about it? Who are you? I was like, oh. Even they were doing that to their own medical experts, which 7 years later, we see a band of highly credentialed medical experts who are being not only dismissed by the establishment, but targeted and persecuted, right? So what I saw happen was, at that time, I was just the athlete who, wasn't credible enough on the greater social circumstance to sound the alarm, I guess. But as soon as highly qualified experts in their field started to get persecuted and blackballed and deplatformed, which were white people, let's just be honest, and these are friends of mine, right? Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Peter McCullough, Robert Malone,
we know those guys,
Chris Martinson, Brett Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, all of these people who were white males, right? Who were very thorough in their field, very good at what they do, incredible, contributed revolutionary things in their field.
Also super positive people who focus their careers on trying to help people. Like they weren't like conspiracy theorists trying to fucking start a cult or do some weird shit. They were just dudes trying to help people. That's it. And they were like, fuck you. But that's what we do, right? We kill MLK, we kill fucking Malcolm X, we kill Jesus. That's what we do.
That's what we do. But my point was, as soon as those individuals started to experience this, now it's like, whoa, something bad is going down. And I agree that is a good signal. But it's just to say that when it comes to an issue like the possibility of tyranny from the police, the Black community is all too familiar with it. Like the FBI raided Fred Hampton's apartment and they assassinated him.
Yeah.
Right. They were on the record and illegally wiretapping Malcolm X and trying to subvert his position in the Nation of Islam by pitting other people within the Nation of Islam against him. One being Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader, or Martin Luther King the same way with, the people who were around him. So those situations aren't just to point to America's history of racism against the Black community, which it certainly is that, but it's more so a sign that the federal government and their grandiosity is out of control. And if we don't check it when it's for Black people or when it's for Latino people or whoever the group of people may be, pretty soon it ends up at all of our doorstep and there's nobody left to help us fight the fight.
It's so funny that I keep hearing people on the right say, I just didn't ever think it would happen like this. Like, really? You didn't think, like, did you not pay attention to anybody else?
Yeah.
Like in America. And it's not just in America. This has happened globally forever, right? What's the poem? First they came for the socialists and I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the Jews and I wasn't a Jew. And I didn't say anything. And then they came for me and there was nobody left to say anything. That is a fucking very poignant statement for these times right now. And some people, a lot of people in our audience ask, what's the right thing to do when the government becomes tyrannical? There's a lot going on there, I guess. Let's say for the sake of argument, we could just form a new government. What about all the folks dependent on the old government systems, right? There's always going to be some friction, some group that gets left out. I mean, it's not like you can just start over sometimes. So I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. I really don't know the answer what to do when the government becomes tyrannical, except for just to resist, because a small act of non-compliance is contagious, right? And government only exists because we allow it to. It's not, government isn't some fucking, it isn't a force. It's not like an element in nature. It is what we allow it to be.
It's not gravity. It's not gravity.
Yeah, we've made some efforts in America to mitigate their monopoly on violence, like the Second Amendment, the 9th and 10th, that send power back to the states. But they're like muscles. They only work if you use them. Otherwise, they atrophy and they stop working. And one muscle is only as good as the rest. If you've got strong calves but weak thighs, you're not going to fucking be able to play ball, man. It's just the way it is. So, and that applies here socially as well. Liberty only exists if it exists for everyone. Otherwise, you're just part of a ruling class and you won't admit it. And that's a problem. That's incongruent with fucking America, in my opinion. We're always going to have in and out groups, obviously. But the only solution that I see is generally non-compliance and two, rethinking what your end group is. My end group are people that believe in fucking individual liberty. That's who I care about, right? And then we'll figure the rest out from there, but that's step one. And if you don't believe in that, then you're my enemy.
Well, it has to be. It has to be right now for sure, because that's where they push the line to. The line is clearly people who want to be people who want freedom, and then people who are okay with being controlled. And so we have to draw that hard line right now. But I think over time, and when you talk about how to shape a society or how to reshape one, it's not by accident that along with the rise of corporatocracy and authoritarian globalist agenda, that impulse control and vice has become the greatest weapon, right? So we've become too preoccupied with too many things, all kinds of things in our lives that distract us from any moral structure or any disciplined value system. that would allow us to find the energy and the motivation to fight back against tyranny on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, in the way that we vote, in the way we participate in the community, in the fights we choose to fight at the school boards, or whatever the case may be. I mean, this is evident that too many middle-aged people are on Facebook, right? And they're not on Facebook organizing, right? That's not what they're doing. They're commenting.
Yeah.
The commentary, the pundency, you could say, went from being a few select anchors on your nightly television to every single person with a cell phone. And so you have a bunch of people talking about a bunch of things and very few people actually pushing back and fighting back. So, I think it wouldn't be as hard to take this country back and move it in a good direction as we think. And it's a big country. Don't get me wrong. There's 400 million people is a lot of people. And we have a lot of systems that have a lot of downhill momentum. But we have brilliant foundations to work from. Our Constitution isn't a wash, right? If you correct for the race, if you correct for the 3/5 of human in our constitutional, in the inception of a constitution, I think we have an incredible constitution in this country, right? Once you correct for the fact that Black people are actually human beings, right? Which was a gross misstep, no doubt. But we've made for that correction, I think, in many ways. And so once you do that, the Constitution does well. Now, the problem is that our Congress and our Senate and our executive branch and our judicial branch are constantly undermining the Constitution. So we try and tell a story in our country where it's like, well, the Constitution isn't worth anything. It's like, no, we just don't really adhere to it, right? Which is actually the problem. When you have a military industrial complex that goes to the judicial branch and in secret green lights the surveillance of the American people, which is completely unconstitutional, like Edward Snowden and many others have alluded to.
Right. And
they do it in the cover of night and in the cover of, what they call classified documents. That undermines the rule of law. That undermines the Constitution.
It's like we're trying to
use.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we're trying to put together a piece of furniture from IKEA, but we refuse to look at the goddamn directions. You know what I mean? And then we're complaining. We're just like, this thing's a piece of shit. And we're like, no, you're an idiot. That's what's really happening. You're a fucking dummy.
You just didn't start with step 1.
Yeah. Well,
you picked up a piece from step 22 and you're over here fiddling with it.
Yeah,
so that's where we are, I think. And there has to be a brand of or a generation of Americans from all ages that come together and really, it takes a few. I think as an athlete, I understand that all games are a game of swings and momentums, especially like a game like basketball. But even now, I understand in the fight game that the competition goes and flows and it's a game of runs, you could say. We just need a very strong run right now from a small group of people who are willing to die for what's right, and we can put a dent in this thing. I think people are very discouraged. They're depressed. They're not optimistic about how to do that. But it's starting. I mean, the right conversations are happening. Now we need some real hitters, I would say, to put a foot down and go, all right, we're willing to die. And so you either come to our side or you got to kill us. I mean, that is part of what the civil rights movement did in the 60s, although a good portion of it was a quid pro quo wink and a nod that we're going to get civil rights without really getting civil rights. But the theory was right? The theory was we're going to the front lines. We're willing to sit in. We're willing to go to jail. How many people are even willing to go to jail to fight back against the vaccine mandates? Not many. Yeah. And as much as I'm in support of the police and the military, and I think that they've been improperly used, and I mean the soldiers and the actual officers by an elite establishment decision-making class in those institutions, how many of them just took the vaccine? Yeah, I mean... It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I can't believe... I'm looking at that. My heart was hurt when I read the number. Like, in my mind, I'm thinking, man, our military and our police officers are the last frontier of freedom within our government structure. Because if they don't carry out the orders, then the elites don't have a leg to stand on. Now, I'm not advocating for a coup, but what I'm saying is that the military does have the opportunity, and the police officers do have the opportunity in real time to take those orders from a corrupt elite or not.
Yep.
And when they don't, and just wholesale get bullied into getting vaccinated with an experimental vaccine, we're in trouble. We're in big trouble.
Yeah, I was really disappointed that so many military people just accepted that shit, to be honest. It was very disheartening because they're leaders, right? If even just half of the military had said no, that would have ended vaccine mandates in its tracks. Like immediately, It would have ended it.
Yep.
They're not going to kick half the fucking military out. That's just not a thing.
Can't do it. You can't do it.
Cool. Well, this has been a great chat. If there's, if you could leave our audience with anything to think about, to roll around in their brains, what would it be?
Well, we are coming into a time period where we have to go back to America first. And what that means is not that we are going to be racist or xenophobic or white nationalist. What it means is that the working man in America has been made to foot the bill for an elitist project that is not interested in the working man. It'd be one thing if the elites were interested in the vitality and the fulfillment or the success of the working man, but they are not. It's clear as day. They see the working class, the middle class, and poor people as the slaves or the engine for their ambitions. And we, as the working class, as the free people, I like to say, of this country, have to decide what our own value is, what our own citizenship is worth. And in doing so, we have to find the courage to step away from this programming, this system that has a lot of downhill momentum, and just stand up for the most basic rights. It's more of an imploring to the everyday citizen who may be watching. Your citizenship is valuable. In the Bible, there's a story about Paul or Peter about to be arrested and beaten by a soldier, and all he had to do was say, "I'm a Roman citizen." Are you allowed to beat a Roman citizen?
Right.
And that soldier he stopped in his tracks, and they had to take Peter or Paul. I forget exactly which one it was on the top of my head. I don't want to misquote the scripture, but they had to take them to Rome to be processed and properly, properly treated. Right. But the point was, that's how much the Roman citizenship was worth. In America, we do not believe in our citizenship because we don't believe in this country. And that has to change. And if our citizenship has any hope of being the thing that walks us into a better future where authoritarianism isn't such an immediate threat.
Yeah. For people that are looking for it, it's called Civis Romanus Sum, and it was Paul in Acts. Yeah. I think it's like the 20th or 21st chapter maybe of Acts, and it just in Latin it means I am a Roman citizen. And there was this actually in the West Wing back in the day. I think I've mentioned it on the show before. Martin Sheen's character talks about it one time. If you were a Roman citizen and somebody that wasn't a Roman citizen attacked you, then the law stated that person was now a target of opportunity for any Roman citizen. Like, it was your duty as a Roman citizen to kill that person if they fucked with another Roman citizen. You know what I mean? And it's interesting the way we organize ourselves like that. I think America first, and I say this a lot too, doesn't mean America only. And it can't, right? Because liberty only exists if it exists for everybody, but it doesn't exist here right now in a lot of ways. And we can't exactly export a product that we can't fucking grow ourselves. You know what I mean? Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. We'll definitely have you back on sometime, anytime you want, actually.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah, man. I think we actually have you coming on our other show, Drink It Bros, sometime not too long from now.
Yeah.
And we'll that one's a bit more. I mean, we talk about a lot of serious subjects, but there will be some comedy in that one too. So make sure you write some jokes for it.
I got you. I came with all heavy stuff today, but I
No, it's all right.
appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a heavy show. All right, cool, man. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you guys next time.